There's no point learning all of the countries of the world and all of their nationalities.
When you're learning languages, people think about going to the country and like being totally immersed in language.
I think one mistake that some people make is going to the country with no knowledge.
Do you use AI to learn?
I saw some flowers and I wanted to know what the word was in Maltese. So I thought, well, I'll ask ChatGPT, and it gave me the wrong word. I studied the old Icelandic first. I just naturally like Icelandic music.
And Cornish, a language you started to learn recently.
I carried on for the second level, second grade. I did that, passed the exam, did the third grade, did that, passed the exam. Then etymology is the beautiful thing that you discover.
Hello everybody. So today we have a special guest here. So I have the privilege to welcome a British polyglot, Richard Simcott, who has been a personal inspiration for me to learn languages. When I was still in Sri Lanka and still growing up, I used to watch his videos and get inspired. So I'm honored and humbled to receive Richard and be able to ask some questions and do a short interview with him. So thank you, Richard, for accepting to be here. And also I thank Luca Lamparello, my friend, who made this happen. Yeah. So thanks a lot. So Richard has studied, of course, you might know him. He studied more than 50 languages and he speaks fluently an impressive number of these languages. So for those who do not know you, how could you briefly introduce yourself, Richard?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I've been studying languages since I was about 5 years old, and I was just interested in how people could speak differently, whether it was accent related or whether it was using different words to express the same kind of ideas and concepts that you have in your head. And that idea really grew and took on its own thing, where I wanted to learn more and more about how people could use language differently to express things and to communicate.
Okay, so you were like very curious about how people learn languages, and that kept you going.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so you discovered that it's something you love, and you went on to study more and more languages later on.
Yeah, that's right. So from 5 really onwards, I've just been studying languages constantly and really enjoy it.
Okay. As you are a native English speaker, what was your second language you studied?
It's kind of difficult to say because, officially studied was French.
Okay.
But there were words of other languages in and used around me from a young age, but French would be the first.
Okay. And then you moved to all the different languages.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. So starting early in as you were a kid, so it helps you to get more exposure, and then you built upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is about once you're studying and when you reach a certain level, let's say mostly at B1 or B2, people reach. I myself experienced this with many languages I've been studying. You reach a plateau, or some people like sort of burnout, and they don't see they're making progress. How do you cope up with this kind of situation? Does it happen to you?
Look, these things happen for many reasons. So, I don't tend to see this as a plateau. I see it more as just the amount of topics that you're covering when you get to B1, B2 level. Really, it's quite broad. So what you're doing is you're learning to communicate effectively on a new topic. And you have to keep going from topic to topic to topic to topic until you've covered most things that you would use. But there are always going to be topics that you're not going to be as comfortable talking about. We even have that in our own languages, that we might not have the exact vocabulary for very specific things to really articulate things. And then the question becomes, well, how much do you know about that topic? So is it a case that you need to learn about that topic just generally in any language? So this is kind of where it is with this kind of discussion in my mind.
Okay, so you don't see it as a plateau, but it's being the content is there's more content as you progress. So people have to cover them. So they are sort of spreading themselves out on a larger content. So you So you have to make a lot of progress because the context is being large.
So when people first start learning languages, I mean, you're typically talking about, basic things about who you are, what you do, what your plans are for the very near future, what you do on a regular basis, what you did maybe in the past. But it's very generic. But when you're talking about the B1, B2 levels, you're talking about things that are to do with, I don't know, it could be military service, it could be the arts, the theatre, music, it could be to do with the environment, it could be to do with politics, it could be to do with many, many things. And those topics just are vastly different. And so what will typically happen is, as a learner, you might cover one topic that you feel comfortable. You've heard lots of things about it or read lots of things about that topic. So you feel confident speaking about that maybe. But then the conversation might turn and change to a new topic that you're not confident with. And it almost feels like you fall back down to the generic basic structures and ideas of the language. And it's really building up each of those topics until you can just speak at the same level on all of those topics.
So you recommend having different contents exposed to you and being able to navigate yourself in different contexts and
Absolutely.
exposing yourself. Or I mean, listen to podcasts on, I don't know, about yoga, and then reading science fiction, sort of like different things.
Yeah, if that interests you. I mean, you also have to ask yourself the question, do I need to learn all of this stuff? Why am I learning it? Is it because I genuinely want to speak about it? Or is it because you think that you should do it? Because to be at that full level, you need to have all this extra knowledge. I would argue that sometimes we don't need all of that detail. Because when people speak in general on the street, they're not using all of that vocabulary all of the time anyway. So it can make it a little bit more challenging to retain the vocabulary.
Yeah, interest is the must. So you have to have learn something that's interested to you. So it's like you are like actively engaged with the content. Okay. So as a person who has learned a lot of languages, what are the most effective methods you are using to learn a new language?
Personally, I find that constant use and exposure to the language is the most important thing for me. Whether that's reading things, listening to things, speaking, using things that I need. Typically, I will challenge myself to try and say things that I know are things I want to say. So, there's no point me learning lots and lots of stuff that I don't have need for. They're not relevant in my life. So, one thing I've learned is that, for example, there's no point learning all of the countries of the world and all of their nationalities and all of the languages and then also all of the jobs that anyone could possibly do. Because if in your family you only have maybe 5 professions that you need to talk about, when you come across a new person who has a different profession, it's actually quite a nice talking point. If you don't know what it is, you can ask them.
Yeah.
So, what do? You describe that job to me using open questions. And you might be able to say, well, can you write that down? Actually, I'm not quite sure what that is. And you could translate it, you can find out what it is. And then when you talk about that person to another person, I met this person the other day and they're actually this, they work as a mechanic and I didn't know the word mechanic. And, these are the kinds of things that I find language expands naturally.
Okay, so not do vocabulary lists, just get more content.
And things that are relevant.
Repetition.
So focusing on what's relevant to you and then building up from that in a more natural way. I think that's the important thing.
Okay, and depending on the language, do you use different methods? For example, because for a language that has a different script or writing way, you might want to employ a different method. So some method might work for language X, and the same method would not work for language Y. So can you give some examples, or what would you do in this case?
I mean, some languages you just don't have the same materials available. So, I mean, if you're learning a language that doesn't have as many speakers or people creating content, then clearly you're not going to have the same choice of things that you can access. This is something for each language you have to look at and say, okay, why am I learning it? What can I actually access? What can I do? and then take it on a case-by-case basis. But pretending that everything is the same in all languages is obviously not true. And some languages will have different challenges as well. So if you're looking at tonal languages and you're not used to tonal languages, clearly you're going to have to focus a little bit more on improving your ability to reproduce tones. So sometimes the pronunciation aspect of learning might be more involved. If you're learning a language that is similar in sounds, in terms of sound values, so for example, if you speak Italian or Spanish, you're going to have an easier job pronouncing Japanese or Greek than you would, for example, Georgian or Russian or something that has quite different sounds. And so I think, whereas one language you might be able to skip or at least do something quite quickly, in another language that might not be the same. The same goes for languages that share vocabulary or grammatical features. Languages from the same family, for example, you're going to have an easier job. And so it's more about the differences than the things that you are new that you have to learn.
Okay. And if, let's say one were to learn a new language with a different script, say Hindi or Chinese or Georgian, how would they should go about it? First, should they learn the alphabet or the symbols or the sounds, or like how to just talk, not to read or write? How would you do about it?
So I mean, a language, a new language with a new script, typically those values represent the sounds. So it's good to know how the sounds are represented so that you can attach that sound value to the new letter or whatever the script entails. Then it's a case of practicing it a lot to get it right and to be able to practice right if you're going to write it, for example, or if you're just going to recognize it. You're going to have to see if you can recognize it in different ways. There are books. One of my friends, Judith Meyer, has written the script hacking books by Teach Yourself, and there are some methodologies in there that I think are fairly good. Things that are easy wins, knowing international words that could help you to decipher a language. So, for example, how an international brand is rendered in there. You're not having to learn the word, you're just learning how the sounds are used in the language and the writing that's used to represent the sounds. The other thing you can do is Studio Rajan, the friend of mine, has a website where he has tools for you to practice the writing systems of many languages and also the sounds, so that you get feedback and also can practice actually physically outlining and writing the scripts.
Okay, I really like this part about these brand names that you mentioned. So if you have a brand name in a different character written, so you know what it is, and then you can mimic the sounds and like understand, oh, these ones refer to these sounds, for example. Okay, that's something speaks to like a lot of people, I would say.
Yeah.
And when you're learning languages, people think about going to the country and like being totally immersed in language, if you can, or learning in a structured way using a textbook or like online course. Well, what is your favorite, or what's your take on this?
So I mean, I've done all sorts of different things to learn languages in the past. Going to the country, I think one mistake that some people make is going to the country with no knowledge. I think that if you're going to go to the country and you're going to spend money doing that, at least learn the basics before you go, because it's quite a waste of time and energy and effort and money to go there with zero knowledge. You can do a lot of the basic stuff before you arrive, and then when you get there, you practice that and build up. For me, courses have always been an important part of my learning. I like structure. I like talking to other people, learning. I like going through the pains of the learning process with them. It makes you feel connected. It makes you feel that you're not going crazy when you don't get something straight away. And sometimes somebody will give you an idea within a group of, oh, well, actually I understood it as this, or actually it reminds me of that. And whether or not you take on that idea, or it sparks another idea in your own head of what makes sense for you to learn it, because that's what you need to do. You need to make it memorable for you as an individual.
Okay, so it's case per case, I would say. So it depends on like how it comes. But if you do go to a country to immerse, just to learn the basics, so you save time and you get a head start.
Absolutely.
As you begin to live there.
Yeah, because if you go there and you know nothing, even if you just know hello, what are you going to do after that?
Yeah, you have to study and so you save this time beforehand.
Yeah.
Once you do your homework, as you say, so you save a lot of time, and once you have the basics, you can get started and keep going. And
yeah, you want to at least be able to go and sort of order something to eat or drink, or say hello, introduce yourself, at least the basic things. You want to be able to do that so that when you go there, you can have a bit of a conversation. People realize you're serious about learning the language, and the chances are that people will talk to you a little bit more. Now, depending on the country you're in, some people will just try and speak to you in another language, usually English, but maybe another language. And if you want to try and avoid that as much as possible, then doing some work before you go is kind of important.
Yeah, I remember in my experience when I went to Brazil, I knew already some of, because I've been friends with Brazilians before, so I knew some phrases, so it helped me to kickstart on, I was speaking from the first day, I would say a little bit, and after 1 week, it really was easier to handle because I was getting exposed and I was asking people how to say, and I was writing them down.
Yeah.
Whereas in Vietnamese, I went to Vietnam without zero knowledge. It took me about 6 months before I really started to speak. So,
right.
So I experienced this, and so I really agree with what you said. And next point is how do you maintain a language? Let's say, okay, you learn it, you get to this level, and then life happens. You change the languages you learn, or you move on to a different project. How would you maintain the languages you've learned? You have learned so many languages, and what is your method?
Yeah, I tend to see which languages naturally fit in, because you've got to keep using them to be able to maintain the language, of course. Sometimes you'll learn a language and you don't get to use it, and it's fine. You have to almost accept that that's not going to be possible every single time. There are languages I studied and I remember having conversations in them with people. I'm not going to say that I spoke them amazingly well, but I had conversations. And now if you ask me to speak, it would be quite challenging to say very much of anything. But I don't tend to worry about that, because I think that you only have a certain number of hours in a day anyway. And so it's almost like a selection process of a very natural kind for languages to be used or not used. And sometimes it surprises you which languages you will come into contact with more often. Sometimes you imagine that you wouldn't, and then you do. And sometimes the opposite is true. You thought you were going to use them more, and then you didn't.
Okay. So it boils down to the fact how you use them. If you use very often, I would say, then it would stick. And if it's for a brief period, you would forget it, or it will not be so natural. But you move on. You accept that you are a human being, and you are not perfect, and you just come to terms with your own self. So just take it easy. If it's really important for you, you would end up coming back to it, and you would go learning it more. So it's a choice to make. It's a human nature, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and this is a question about the AI and the technology. So recently we've been seeing a rise of a lot of apps and ChatGPT, all the buzzwords associated with it, and what is your take on this? Do you use AI to learn, and do you think it's going to change the way we learn languages?
Yeah, I use ChatGPT, and I find it pretty useful. I ask questions, I get ChatGPT to talk to me sometimes in different languages. Is it the main thing I use? No. but it is a tool I use, and yeah, I do find it useful. Clearly it's quite clever at writing things or saying things. For example, even now, some languages have got a lot better over the last year or so. So yeah, I mean, it's here, and we need to kind of use it, I think, in a way that makes sense for us.
It also maybe gives you the possibility of speaking practice, because sometimes you are not living in the country where you want to speak the language, and it can give you this feedback of like when you talk, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So for me, speaking Maltese, for example, learning Maltese for the conference in Malta, I used ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT open questions to give me information about Malta, its history, people that were important, and it would give me listening practice in Maltese. And then I could interact a little bit as well with ChatGPT, get it to explain structures or conjugate verbs or tell me about certain words. And it was pretty good, yeah. I mean, it's all about the instructions you give it as well. You have to be able to sort of give it good prompts so that it knows. You can even sort of say, what age range of language you want it to give. So I want you to rewrite this text, but for the use of like 7-8-year-olds, for example.
Okay.
And it'll simplify the text. Or, if you want to say, help me learn whatever, I need a story to help me learn these words, it will incorporate these words into a story. So it'll do lots of things that I think are very useful.
Yeah, it's so it depends on the input you give, like the prompt. You have to be very clear and about what you want to get out of it. So it all depends on the prompt. It could simplify or it could make it more complex depending on what you are asking for it.
Yeah.
So I think it's personally I've been using it as well. It's a very good tool to get things explained to you. And if you're learning multiple languages, so you can ask, for example, if you know some word in English and you want to know how it's said in French or Italian, you can ask at the same time, and it will. You can see that sometimes there are similarities, and sometimes there are not, and you can ask, what is the etymology, and so you can go to like different rabbit holes and explore many niche details with it. Yeah. But sometimes it could make mistakes, so of course
absolutely
you can take it. You should take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, that's one of the issues, is that it's not very good at recognizing when it's incorrect, and it will take you on a long journey. I had that experience in Malta actually, where I was I saw some flowers and I wanted to know what the word was in Maltese, so I thought, well, I'll ask ChatGPT, and it gave me the wrong word, and then based on that, I understood some of the etymology that was in the word. So the word was for marigolds, and these are an important flower in Mexico for the Dia de los Muertos. And I was reminded of the Polyglot Conference in Cholula, and that's why I'd like to know what that is in Maltese. And it told me the word was kalkara, and it actually wasn't. But I recognised kalk as the Latinate word that also has Greek origins, which is to do with limestone, and it's kind of the basis of words like calculus or calculator in English. Because originally there was little clay beads or limestone beads that were used to count.
Like the abacus.
Yeah, exactly. So it took me on this huge journey, and then it turned out that the word was not kalkara for this flower. But it told me how, yes, they were probably called that because they grew in limestone soil, and I followed it for about half an hour, and then I asked my Maltese teacher and shared this wonderful experience, and he said, I don't think that's the right word.
Okay, you being sort of a detective and like trying to explore the origin of this word, and then it throws you in a rabbit hole, and then in the end, like, you get the human verification, like from your teacher, what is correct, but it took you some discovery, and it's sort of a brain exercise. So sometimes you have to like confirm what it says, especially for language that is not being trained very well, like for example, because the resources are less that are being going that go into the training of these models, because Maltese is relatively a language whose content is not so much available, I would say, to compared to English, for example. And also it's a language that has etymologies from Arabic, also from Latin-based languages.
Yep, that's right, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And going about your journey about 50 plus languages, what has been the easiest and what has been the hardest?
Well, I think that probably German was the easiest in terms of I was in Germany, I was speaking German all the time, and so it felt kind of easy and natural to learn. Although I do remember spending a lot of time trying to remember words and use them and getting things wrong. So, and I mean, you're always getting things wrong and learning, even as if you're talking about your first language, right? First languages. There's always something to learn. But yeah, that one, I think because of the situation I was in, it felt easiest. Hardest for me was Georgian. Even after 1 year of study, I couldn't really say very much. And that was due to the fact that I never really heard the language, didn't have any contact with it, couldn't really hear it online or use it online. And the consonant clusters were quite difficult to memorize, made it difficult to memorize the words. And also the plosive sounds that are in there are quite challenging to pronounce in a fluent manner. And then the grammar itself was also fairly complicated.
Okay. Would you say if the scenarios had been different, so were you had you been in Georgia living, and would it have been easier for you to learn it? And if you didn't live in Germany and study it online or didn't have the resources, would the answer be different?
Yeah, probably. I think that, there are lots of different ways to go about learning languages. And yeah, I mean, look, if you're exposed to Georgian more often and you hear it and you see it and you're trying to use it, then it's going to be easier to speak. But is it going to be easy to speak? I don't know. It's very, very different to English, whereas German and English are related. So there are lots of words that are immediately the same or very similar between English and German compared to Georgian.
Yeah, it's interesting because what Richard's saying is it's relative to him and what his language journey has been. So something easy for someone might not necessarily be the same for somebody else. So it's personal, and it depends on how you learn the language and where you learn it, and in which neighbor, like in which environment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And have you encountered any cultural barriers learning a language? And if you did, how did you overcome?
I mean, there are always cultural things that you need to take into account when you learn language. People have different things that they say or do and don't do. So sometimes in a culture, it's the opposite of your original culture. And just to give you an example, even here in Italy, I mean, I think there's a thing of also you don't kind of open lots of windows in a house to let the air flow through. So probably like in the Balkans as well, you wouldn't do that because people don't like the draft going through the house. They think it's going to make them sick. Oh. They'd be worried. Italians tend to be worried about if they've been sweating and then they go out and they get cold. People worry about getting a cold or something. These are things that, for example, if I were to open windows in the UK, that would be seen as you're letting some nice fresh air in. Those kind of things, just a very basic thing of opening windows at the wrong time or in the wrong place for people in other countries would be like, oh, what are you doing? You're trying to kill me. These kinds of things you come across quite a lot. And yeah, when you understand the logic of how that works, then you can make sense of why people react a certain way.
So the language helps to...
The language does help, yeah. Certain things that you don't talk about as well in some languages, whereas in one language it might be perfectly normal and fine, in another culture, another country, you don't mention certain things.
Yeah, that's true. And let's talk about the Icelandic, which is a language I think is considered hard to learn. And um, um, in the polyglot community, I haven't seen a lot of people speaking it or studying. Maybe studied, but not to continuous way of studying and being able to reach conversation level. How did you learn Icelandic, and what helped you to become conversational in Icelandic?
I studied Old Icelandic first at university. So we read the sagas in Icelandic and translated them to English, then back to Icelandic, and that was what we had to do for our exam. So I did some of that many, many years ago. And then I always wanted to go and learn Icelandic, modern Icelandic. So I signed up to do the summer course in Iceland, at the University of Iceland, many years ago now.
In Reykjavik?
Yeah, in Reykjavik. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I did that for a summer, and I was because I had already studied some Icelandic on my own before I went. I was put in this group where we covered basically the grammar of Icelandic, and it was a course that has university credits. It was quite intensive. We had lessons every day, and then we spoke in Icelandic as well. I mean, I was using it in town. But like any language, if you don't use it and you're not speaking it, you're not going to get the most out of that kind of thing. So yeah, I found that was quite useful. I mean, I just naturally like Icelandic music. I like the sound of the language, and I enjoy, learning about it and reading things in Icelandic or seeing things in Icelandic. My Icelandic's far from perfect, or even I would even say good. But I can make myself understood, and it's not strange for me when I hear it, if you know what I mean. So I can follow quite a lot of stuff. But yeah, there are some people in the community who learn. There are people who have been and then finished the entire degree in Icelandic as a second language in Iceland. People who come to the conference, for example, and they speak Icelandic or even become Icelandic. They've even got the passport.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Wow! I know one guy because I'm a fan of chess. As you can see, there's a Bobby Fischer. He ended up becoming Icelandic in the end.
Yeah.
2 different reasons.
Yes, very different reasons. Yes, it's a controversial figure.
Yeah, I know he did become Icelandic at some point.
Yeah, I think he's buried there. Is that right?
This I'm not sure, but yeah. He was there, and they have this annual tournament in Reykjavik, Icelandic Open, I think, chess tournament.
Yeah.
In March or February, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So you studied the language, the Old Icelandic beforehand, and then you went to Iceland, studied at the university, took courses, and got full immersion, living there, listening to music.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I've been there a couple of times in summer and on the winter. But it was very hard for me to pick it up, and I could say like takk fyrir, and that's it. I found it very hard though.
Yeah, it just takes a bit of time, exposure, and also I think one of the issues is also when the community also speaks another language like English well, and in Iceland people do speak English well. Yeah. So it can make sometimes the barrier to a full conversation quite high. But yeah, I found it personally quite nice how they'd react and respond to me trying to speak Icelandic, and I felt encouraged. So yeah, I love Iceland. I've always had this thing for Iceland. It's a very soft spot for the country, for the people. And
countries are made so beautiful, and because I've been summer and the winter, I've loved it. It's a different contrast. Yeah, and Cornish, a language you started to learn recently, and why did it motivate you? Because languages usually pick you than you picking languages.
Yeah.
What was the motivation?
Cornish, actually it was a friend of mine, Maureen, who found this Cornish language course online, and it was the pandemic time. A lot of language courses were coming online, and she said, "Do you fancy doing it?" So I said, "Okay, I'll do some Cornish, why not?" and I already spoke Welsh, which is a sister language of Cornish. I thought, okay, it should be fun. And I started learning it, and I met the people in the group. Maureen's job meant that she could no longer make the class, but I carried on, and I did the first level exam. And then by that time, I'd met more people, and I joined some conversation groups and things. And I was using it maybe three or four times a week, maybe. And I carried on for the second level, second grade. I did that, passed the exam. Did the third grade, did that, passed the exam. Then for the fourth year, I did the fourth grade, which is quite involved. There's a lot to cover. You have to do literature, you have to do the history of the language, you have to do place names in Cornwall, and also the language itself. So I did all of that and passed that, and now I've completed all those grades, and then I joined the terminology panel for the Cornish language. So it's a language that I didn't know would become such an important part of what I do and who I am and my life, but it really has. I know a lot of people in the community now, and they've been very welcoming and very kind, and I love Cornish, and I love reading books in Cornish. I have groups that I study with that we work through Cornish literature, and it's a lot of fun. I like it a lot.
Congratulations on passing this test and getting these grades. Things you do for friends, as you say. So you're also known for studying indigenous languages, and that are not very popular, I would say, to learn.
Yeah.
So you started to learn also Northern Sami, and which is spoken in the northern part of Sweden, Finland, and Norway. So I myself have been going to Sweden since a couple of years in summer to learn Swedish, and because of these trips, I've been to Jokkmokk in the north of Sweden, and Storforsen, and I've been able to see the culture of Sami people and listen to some Sami yoiks. So what motivated you to pick up another Sami?
Well, it was a story of the pandemic again. A number of courses. What I decided was, when the pandemic hit, I was going to study Persian, and I decided that I saw these courses appear online and thought, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of these courses coming online. Northern Sami was actually, I think, the first one. Oh no, second one. First one that I saw was Kristang, and then Northern Sami. And I thought, I'm going to follow this course. It was a 3-month course, and we went through basically a course book for Northern Sami that the teacher wanted to kind of have a test group to go through it. And I just really enjoyed it. So I did it, not expecting to really carry on with it, but just to explore a new language and see what it was like, because I had no idea about Northern Sami really. And I really enjoyed it. But unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge dissipates after a while. And so my Northern Sami is not anything to write home about at all.
Okay.
But it was an interesting insight into the culture and into the language and how it works.
Would you like to go to this part of the world and enjoy a bit, listen to it?
Yeah, of course. I'm always interested in seeing new places and meeting new people and hearing more about their cultures and languages. Now, I've been to the north of Norway before. I've been to Tromsø, and I went to a museum there where it featured these Sami cultures and languages featured. But I'd like to return and do something.
Yeah, they have a nice museum in Jokkmokk. It's called Aite in north of Sweden. It's about the Sami culture and the Sami people. If you do get a chance, I recommend going there. We're coming to the last few questions. How does being a polyglot shape your worldview or understand different cultures?
For me personally, I think that as somebody from the UK originally, being educated through English, with very much a British colouring to history that we had, going and living in different countries and cultures, you see that there's a lot more than one version of the same history. So you get to hear different points of view of how it was like for other players within historical events. And then if you go deeper, when you get to the Indigenous type of questions or situations, then you hear, even within that different context, how it was for the different peoples who lived through it as well, for them as groups often that are really a side note for a lot of historical teachings. But to hear it from their point of view and to hear what they experienced and the effects of that is something I think that, being a polyglot, that's what opens up for me.
So it exposes you to like different lenses,
exactly.
different viewpoints, what happened, so you can have more leverage on what really happened.
Yeah.
And what would be the most underrated thing about being a polyglot that people don't think about really?
Underrated.
Overrated.
I think the people often ask about how many languages do you speak and what are the languages, and that's kind of the obvious thing, right? But I think the etymology is the beautiful thing that you discover learning these languages, because you get to experience what words are, where they've come from, how they've changed, how they've adapted, how they're used by different cultures and peoples, and there's something quite beautiful about that.
Yeah, I could relate to this because I discovered recently, a few years ago, a French word that came through Portuguese but has origins from Sri Lanka.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting. It's called cornac.
Uh-huh.
So it's a word in Portuguese called cornaca, and so it's a person who is racing an elephant.
Ah.
So they took it from the Portuguese colonizators who were in Sri Lanka in 16th century. So they took a local word which we do not use anymore.
Uh-huh.
So it gives you a facet of the language in Sinhalese that we don't have anymore, this word, but has you can find these books in the Kutos books about the history about that time, that how they used the local word and like Portuguesized the word. And so it used the word called Kurawanaika. So Kura has some meanings associated to elephant in local languages, in local Sinhalese. We have cities called Kurunagal, which are related to elephants, and Kuruganga, so the river that is connected to also elephants, I would say. So this word like traveled across like to Portuguese and then come to French through this. So I found it really amazing, and I had never thought it would be such an etymology.
Yeah.
So and talking about the Polyglot Conference, an amazing event that you created in 2013.
Yeah.
And what was the motivation? I mean, it's a place for a lot of polyglots to come together and share their experiences and learnings and share the knowledge. What motivated you to create this event in the first place?
Originally, the Polyglot Conference was born out of a subgroup on a language learning forum called How to Learn Any Language, and they had a sub-forum, the Polyglot sub-forum, and the idea was to bring people together in person, to break bread and to share experiences and to listen to each other, whether it was people who worked in academia, professionally with languages, or just people who enjoyed learning languages. Nowadays, the Polyglot Conference is for everybody or everyone who loves language. So whether you're learning your first or your 31st, I've always found that I can learn something from everyone. So even children who speak one language, sometimes they'll say things or they'll share things that I hadn't thought about, or they'll spark ideas, or I'll even just directly learn something from them. So I think that we can all learn from each other, and that's the beautiful thing about languages. So the conference now encompasses all of that. People on very different paths, very different journeys, but using languages in different ways as well. So it's an opportunity to get together, to learn from each other, to practice languages if we want, and to just enjoy time together, breaking bread, and actually doing what we need languages for, communication and human connection.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, bringing together the people and making it possible to share and learn from each other. And I would say we come to the last question. What advice would you give to somebody who is just starting their language learning journey?
Remember that it takes time. It's not something we can really rush. It's be kind to yourself and allow yourself to make mistakes, allow yourself to get things wrong, allow yourself to forget things, and just go back to it regularly and do something each day so that you can consolidate your learning and so that it can grow in a more natural and organic way.
Yeah, do something each day. So that's, I think, the key. Do like small progress, be kind. I think these are very nice messages. And with that, we conclude this interview. Thank you very much, Richard. It's been an amazing pleasure to have you. I mean, as a person who has been inspired by you, I'm really honored to have you here. And I've learned a lot from you today. And I hope so have our learners, the viewers. So thank you for watching, guys. And see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
And cut.
Cut.